Which is what if Naruto got drunk and unexpectedly formed a harem with the Sailor Moon team. Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic, then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Usagi was in tremendous pain as she lay on her hospital bed desperately trying to give life to the child within her womb. There was a sense of urgency knowing that the hospital could soon be under attack by that horrific tailed beast, the Kyuubi. Looking into the midwife's eye after a push, Usagi could see the fear that resided in the midwife's heart. If the woman had the ability to look back on her life and not focus on the immense pain she was currently in, she would have been surprised at the route her life had taken. Konoha was not her native town. In fact, the world she was living on was not even the world of her birth. 8 years ago she had been caught in the explosion caused by the destruction of Pharaoh 90. When she had awakened in the Konoha hospital, she was told that a genin team led by their Jonin sensei had found her washed up on the shore surrounded by the wreckage of things they couldn't identify. She then had met with the team that had found her, and that's where she met him, Minato Namikaze. The two of them had a few minutes of conversation before Minato offered to let her stay with him for a few days until she could get back on her feet. At the time she didn't know why, but that night she revealed to Minato the fact that she was from a different world. Minato was shocked for a moment but then just smiled and accepted this as a fact. Minato explained to Usagi that, while he believed her, most of the people in Konoha wouldn't believe her and call her crazy. That night the two of them stayed up crafting a cover story for her. In the end they decided to say that she was on board a ship from a country across the Eastern Ocean that sank. To explain away her unique abilities, Minato said that they would just say that it was a bloodline limit. Everyone accepted the story except for the Hokage, who they told the truth to. Over the years she and Minato kept in close touch until 3 years ago when Minato asked her to marry him and she accepted. They were married just 6 months after the end of the Leaf Rock War and 2 months before Minato became the 4th Hokage. When she had found out that she was expecting a child, she and Minato couldn't be happier. However, for the past 2 weeks she had been ill and was bedridden in the hospital in order to make sure that her and her child would be safe. Then that blasted fox had to appear and her child decided to come out now of all times. The pain of giving birth was beginning to be unbearable for her. Her son seemed stubborn in wanting to come out even though she had gone into labor. After one last push she heard the crying of her child taking his first breath in the world. One of the midwife's assistants came next to her and said, "You have a healthy baby boy, Usagi." Sarutobi silently cried as he looked at the little baby sleeping peacefully in his arms. The little boy was only a few days old, but sadly most of the civilians in Konoha harbored a deep hatred for the little babe. They blamed little Naruto for the sins that the Kyuubi had wreaked on Konoha even though the two were separate persons. When Sarutobi thought about the situation he let out a curse towards his predecessor, "Damn you Minato. I should have been the one to use the seal, not you. As a result of your stubborn determination, your only son is now an orphan and hated by the village we've sworn to protect. At least our ninjas respect your skills enough to know that your son is not the Kyuubi." Sarutobi stopped his gripping when he saw a furry black cat with a crescent moon on her forehead moving quietly along the corners of his office. Sarutobi then spoke up and said, "Hello Luna, is there something I can help you with?" Luna turned her head to look at Sarutobi before she walked near and jumped onto his desk. Luna looked lovingly at the little babe resting in the old Hokage's arms before speaking, "Yes, there is something you can help me with. You can tell me your plans are for my prince." Sarutobi almost chuckled when he looked at Luna as she spoke to him. It always made Sarutobi smile when he saw Luna and Usagi's good cop, bad cop routine. Although the little advisor was always overly paranoid in his mind, one could tell how much she cared about Usagi and now Naruto. In his wise old grandfatherly voice Sarutobi said, "Don't worry your little head Luna. You know that I loved Usagi like she was my own daughter, just like almost everyone who knew her. Besides, I owe Minato quite a lot and the village is sadly just increasing the debt owed to Naruto's family. I've gotten the council to leave Naruto alone, but I can't adopt him like I would have liked to do. I've arranged for you and Naruto to have a small cottage on the edge of one of the quieter edges of town. Sadly, Naruto can't live in his parents' house until he can claim his father's name and we both know the conditions for that to happen." At this point both Luna and Sarutobi bowed their heads in thought. Naruto would have to have his true name hidden to protect him until he became a chunin. He reached 18 years old, or he married. Luna's face grew firm as she spoke. "I may only be able to be in my human form for 1 hour out of 3, but I will take care of Naruto. When they really needed help, I couldn't help his mother or his grandmother. I will not fail Naruto now when he needs my help. Sarutobi just nodded his head and thought that maybe Naruto's luck was about to change. Almost 12 years later, in a meadow on the edge of Konoha, as the sun was casting its evening light, a little boy could be found. Naruto Tuskino, the future Hokage according to him, and that demon brat, according to some of the nastier villagers, was hard at work practicing his martial arts. Naruto didn't know why most of the older villagers hated or ignored him, but he wanted to change that. He wanted to become Hokage to protect the few people that were kind to him and to show the others how wrong they were about him. Sweat was starting to run down Naruto's face as he finished his rough kata. The kata was choppy and had a lot of holes in it, but it was coming along fairly well and in a few days should be his 7th custom kata. At the Ninja Academy, the martial arts instructor seemed to have a grudge against him and would only teach Naruto the minimum. It had been about 4 years ago when, just a few days into the academy, Naruto noticed that some of the kids were better in that particular class and were using different styles. Determined not to be outdone, right then and there Naruto had silently vowed to create a powerful family style for the Tuskino family. Over the past 3 years Naruto took his minimal academy training, his observations of Chunin practicing, and his own gut instinct to slowly form the Gintuskikan, Silver Moon Fist style of martial arts. It wasn't just his own observations that he used in creating and refining the Silver Moon Fist. Whenever he could, Naruto would go to the local library to read about ninjas. Those books had been a godsend to Naruto whenever he was stuck on something. The most blaring example of this happened a year ago when he was trying to get a basic framework for the Silver Moon Fist together. Naruto was on the verge of giving up and going to old man Sarutobi for help when he read that some martial arts schools were based on the movements of animals. Ever since then Naruto had adopted the feline movements of Aunt Luna. Suddenly Naruto's practice was interrupted by a voice yelling, "Naruto, get in the house now. Supper's starting to get cold." After yelling that he was coming, Naruto started to walk back home where Aunt Luna was waiting for him. Naruto might have thought it strange that his aunt was a talking cat who, on occasion, could transform into a human, but he just took it as a fact of his life. Luna and Naruto loved each other dearly. Even a blind man could see that about the aunt and nephew. One thing that Naruto liked about Luna was that she supported him in everything he did. She never claimed that something was out of his reach if he worked hard enough at it. While Sarutobi and later Iruka cared deeply for Naruto and he cared for them, they just weren't there 24/7 like Luna was with him. When Naruto had said, at age 5, that he wanted to become Hokage, Luna had told him that he would have to work hard to get there and she would help him. When Luna taught him what she could about being a ninja, she made sure that he paid attention and heaven help him if she found out that he had been slacking at the academy. Naruto walked through the door of the small cottage to see Luna waiting on the dinner table in her cat form for him. After Naruto sat down at the table, the two of them began to eat. It was a simple meal that Luna had prepared for them, as even after 12 years of practice she could only make simple meals. The meal was eaten in silence as Luna was too busy eating her meal and Naruto was, for the moment, tired out. Once dinner was over and the dishes taken care of, Naruto hurried upstairs and then hopped out of his bedroom window onto the roof. It was a warm evening with clear skies granting Naruto the full view of the heavens. Ever since Naruto could remember, he was fascinated by the heavens. There was something about the stars and the moon that just seemed to call to him. Naruto knew the names of all the stars and their locations throughout the year by heart. Naruto could with a glance at the heavens and tell where he was to within a second or two of his actual position. When Iruka had found out about that skill, he had told Naruto that it would help Naruto on long-distance missions. Naruto spent a few hours just looking at the moon and forgetting his worries and troubles. Whenever he was feeling nervous or troubled, Naruto had found a quick glance at the moon calmed him down. Once he had told this fact to Luna and said that it was quite funny as his name meant, Maelstrom of the Moon. For a moment Naruto swore he saw shock on Luna's face, but when he looked again she was smiling and agreeing that it was quite funny. Slowly Naruto's eyelids closed as the young ball of energy went off into dreamland. "Where on earth am I?" Naruto yelled into the air around him. The last thing that he could remember was falling asleep on the roof of the cottage, which definitely wasn't where he was now. Looking around him, all Naruto saw was the fallen ruins of some grand marble building, and that he was apparently in the courtyard of the building. Naruto closed his eyes and said to himself, "Okay, first things first. I'll figure out where I am and then I'll plan from there." Naruto opened his eyes facing the heavens to see the earth. Naruto started to freak for a second before he got control of himself and smirked. Going over the situation in his mind, Naruto almost laughed. Interesting genjutsu. I have to admit that it had me going for a second, but that Earth is just a dead giveaway. Naruto then proceeded to try the release method for dispelling the genjutsu. Seeing that the sight around him was the same, Naruto started to grumble. Okay, someone knows what they're doing when they created this illusion. However, there's more than one way to break an illusion. Naruto then grabbed a sharp rock that was lying on the ground and proceeded to cut his arm. I would advise you to stop trying to undo this, as it's not an illusion. A soft, gentle voice from behind Naruto said just as Naruto's cut was rapidly healing. Naruto spun around to face the owner of the voice and demand that she explain herself. However, Naruto's plans stopped when he gazed on the image of the woman in front of her. She was unearthly beautiful with long purple hair styled in ox horns with streamers. On her head rested a delicate diamond crown, while her face was gentle and caring with a crescent moon birthmark on her forehead. Her dress was simple and pure white. The woman smiled at Naruto and said softly, "My name is Queen Serenity, and I mean you no harm, Naruto. In fact, I have been waiting a long while to meet you." Naruto lowered his guard. For some reason his instincts were telling him to trust this queen in front of him. Still, where were they and why was a queen waiting to meet him? These two questions gnawed at the back of Naruto's mind, demanded to be answered. As if she saw his inner struggle, Queen Serenity calmly said, "I'm sure you want to know where we are and why I want to meet you." Serenity then sat down on a fallen marble pillar and motioned for Naruto to sit next to her. Trusting in his instincts, Naruto quietly complied with her request. "Now then, Naruto, we are currently in an area between the world of the living and the afterlife where our souls can meet and talk. You see, I died long ago when the kingdom whose ruins are shown around you was destroyed. Now for the second question that is likely on your mind, why does she want to meet with me, requires a backstory to understand." A sad look crossed Serenity's eyes and a tear fell as she remembered those days. However unpleasant these memories were for the late queen, Serenity was determined to not let them get the better of her and so continued her tale. "You see, Naruto, the universe is like a great tree with many branches. These branches or dimensions represent different chains of events that result in different things happening. I come from a different dimension than the one you live in. A long time ago, in my dimension, there was a large empire spanning across the entire solar system and I was its queen. But my empire was destroyed when a woman, who desired my daughter's boyfriend, made a pact with an entity of pure evil and together destroyed my empire. I had managed in the end to seal this entity along with the woman into another dimension. Seeing my world literally dying in front of my eyes, I used the last of my strength to send the soul of my daughter, her love, her friends, and the few surviving people of my kingdom to be reborn on the planet Earth. My daughter Serenity was reborn on Earth as Usagi Tuskino. When she was 14, she met my advisor Luna and gained the ability to use a portion of her royal power. She, along with her love and friends, fought against several evils that were threatening the people around her. During her last battle with a powerful creature known as Pharaoh 90, Usagi was caught in the aftershocks of the creature's death and sent to your dimension. She then met your father and later had you just before she died. So see, Naruto, I'm your grandmother." Naruto just sat there for a minute trying to process what this lady, his grandmother, was telling him. Hesitantly Naruto asked, "So I'm really your grandson and a prince?" Serenity just smiled and nodded her head towards her grandson before she pulled him into a hug. Naruto couldn't be happier that he had found out about his family. All that Luna would tell him when he asked was that his father was a high-ranking ninja and that she couldn't tell him more until certain conditions were met to assure his safety. Serenity then pulled Naruto back and had him face her before she seriously said, "Naruto, I don't have a lot of time left to talk to you, so I'll be brief. Shortly after you were born, Naruto, the Kyuubi was sealed inside of you. Ask Luna or that kind old Hokage to tell you the full story. The point of me telling you this is that having the Kyuubi within you jump-started your lunar royal powers. As a member of the lunar royal family, you have immense power naturally and power that you draw from the moon. Your powers have been active since that beast was sealed within you, constantly fighting against it. As a result of this constant usage, along with the purifying nature of our lunar energy, the Kyuubi has been killed. However, this great piece of news has left you with a very serious problem. Your body, on its own and by drawing from the moon, naturally generates the power of 12 kgs all the time. However, your body at its current state can't withstand the strain. Even with your healing ability that you took from the Kyuubi, your body will soon destroy itself due to its young age and not fully matured chakra network. But don't worry about it, my handsome grandson. I've been able to create a solution for your problem. Thanks your excess power and my limited abilities, I was able to alter how you naturally generated your energy. You now have 3 states, grandson. These states are in order of weakest to strongest: civilian, senshi, and royal. Your civilian form is limited to only the energy that your body naturally generates on its own. With the senshi state you gain control of about 1/10 of the energy you draw from the moon, in addition to your natural strength. The final state, royal state, grants you full access to the powers of the moon that you currently can call upon. As long as you don't go for days on end at your current training level, your senshi form will not cause your body harm. Your senshi form also grants you an armored outfit along with some powerful attacks that you will instinctively know. Moving on, you have to know about your royal state. It is incredibly powerful, but you can at your level of training only hand its power of at most 30 minutes before it harms your body. If you are ever forced to use it in a fight, end it as quick as possible. In order to reach these states you have to say the transformation words for them. Don't worry yourself about the transformation phrase, when you wake up you will know them. Also, as these powers are going to be transmitted to your descendants, I want you to know that they will all learn on their own what their transformation phrase. Even if their transformation phrase is the same as another person's and they utter the phrase, they won't be able to transform until they learn from within themselves what the phrase is. Knowing that their time was almost up, Serenity pulled Naruto into a hug again and whispered softly in his ear, "I love you, grandson. Your parents are very proud of you and how you've grown. Don't cry, dear one. This isn't the last time that we will meet each other. I'll pop in from time to time just to visit her when you really and honestly need me." The landscape around Naruto started to get foggy, like a mist was rolling in. Just before he felt his grandmother's arms stop hugging him, Naruto whispered, "I love you, grandma." Naruto woke up with the morning sun to find himself on the roof of his house. Pulling himself up into a sitting position, Naruto briefly wondered aloud, was that all just a dream? He immediately shook his head, knowing in his mind that what had happened had not been a dream but something more. While Naruto wanted to find out more about why he had carried the Kyuubi, he wanted to try out his new abilities a lot more. Naruto hopped off the roof and down to the ground before he took off running towards the meadow where he liked to practice. Stopping in the middle of the meadow, Naruto hurriedly looked around to make sure that no one was by chance near him. He then calmed down and remembered what his grandma had told him about accessing his powers. Naruto closed his eyes and began trying to meditate to find out his transformation phrase. It took a few minutes, but Naruto succeeded and found his senshi release phrase. Naruto was a little confused about the phrase and with a questioning tone said, "Moon Crystal Armor, energize." As soon as the last word was uttered from Naruto's lips, a bright flash of silver light hid him from view. When the light ended only a second later, Naruto could feel the large surge in his power level and the sharpening of his senses. Wanting to know what he now looked like in his senshi form, Naruto quickly walked over to the edge of the meadow where there was a small stream. Looking back at Naruto from the water was a young boy dressed in a silvery white outfit that looked like something from the 1001 Nights that Luna sometimes read to him. The cape of the outfit was pinned with a small silver crescent moon. Due to the hood of the cape and the face mask of the outfit, one could only see Naruto's startling blue eyes. At Naruto's right side was a small curved silver dagger, while at his right side was an ornate but functional katana. For a moment or two Naruto just admired his new outfit, then he began to wonder at what special abilities it granted him. As soon as Naruto asked that question in his mind, knowledge of his abilities began downloading into his mind. The dagger at his side had an attack called Selene Shield Shatter. This attack would, depending on the amount of energy he put in it, destroy any barriers that a person created via a jutsu or magic. The sword at his right, besides having an incredibly sharp edge, had a mid-range attack called Serenity Slash. Finally, Naruto's longest range and most precise attack was summoning a magic bow and unleashing an Artemis arrow. Naruto was thinking about trying out one of his attacks, but then he heard a noise coming from behind him. While pulling out his sword, Naruto turned to face the cause of the noise. Suddenly a scent that Naruto unconsciously recognized floated by his now extremely sensitive nose. His brain putting a face to that scent, Naruto suddenly let out a cry of surprise, "Luna! Luna, if that's you, can you please come out now to where I can see you?" From behind a small bush, Out walked Naruto's feline aunt. Luna, with a look of surprise on her face, sat down on her hind feet in front of Naruto and uttered out, "How did you?" At this point, Luna lost all ability to speak and just pointed to Naruto's new outfit silently. Naruto was confused for a second but then realized what she was referring to that had left her speechless. Within his mind, Naruto debated whether or not to tease her. However, Naruto decided that he didn't want to be so mean to Luna, especially since it looked like she was about to have a heart attack. "I fell asleep last night looking at the moon. I then found myself in some marble ruins that looked like they were on the moon. There I meet the spirit of the last queen of a lunar kingdom who claimed to be my grandmother. She then says that I have had the Kyuubi placed in me, but that because of my royal heritage, my body destroyed the Kyuubi. She told me that I would be able to transform into this senshi form as she called it and also a royal form, but that the royal form would be too dangerous for me for now." For a minute after Naruto stopped his explanation, both he and Luna stood in the field silently. Then Luna clapped her hands together in a little prayer and said, "Thank the goddess, I always was afraid that the Kyuubi would prevent you from showing your full heritage." Luna's face then turned serious as she looked Naruto directly in the eyes and continued to speak. "Naruto, transform immediately and speak of this and your heritage to no one. Today, while you're taking your genin exam, I will speak with the Hokage about this." Seeing that Naruto was about to complain, Luna said, "Naruto, this is very serious. Some people may take your new power as something given by that demon even though it's not. Also, your mother was known for her royal abilities even if she just claimed that they were a bloodline limit. While your mother was quite beloved, she also had enemies who were jealous of her. Those enemies of hers plus the enemies of your father, if they put two and two together, if they see your royal abilities will come after you to terminate you." Luna was now sporting a tear in her eye as she continued to speak to the now worried Naruto. "Please Naruto. I lost your grandmother and then your mother. I would die now if I lost you as well. I know that you have craved to be accepted by the village as a whole, but is that acceptance you so crave worth dying so soon after you gain it? Soon you will be strong enough to protect yourself and all those that you hold dear from those who seek to harm you and them. Then you will have that acceptance you so crave, but you have to wait for that point." Naruto thought about what his aunt had to say. He quickly decided that having the respect of the villagers wasn't worth putting his life and the lives of his few precious people on the line. Naruto then closed his eyes and focused on transforming. After a minute, Naruto found the mental switch to flip so that he could return to his civilian form. A brief flash of light later and Naruto was standing in front of Luna. Naruto then reached down and gave Luna a big hug while he was happy saying, "Thanks for the advice, Auntie Luna. I love you." At this, Luna smiled before replying that she loved him as well. This family bonding moment was broken when Naruto suddenly realized something that he yelled out, "I have to be at the academy in 10 minutes and I'm not ready." Luna suddenly found herself floating in the air as Naruto ran for the house to quickly pack what he needed for the test. She quickly backflipped in order to land on her feet and then turned to look at Naruto's dust trail. Suddenly Luna remembered an earlier time when she would watch a different blonde run about trying to get to class on time. Even though Usagi's death still hurt the black cat, thinking about her and how she could be found in her lovable son brought a tear to Luna's eye. Quietly Luna whispered, "You would be proud of him, my beloved princess. He's everything you said you wanted in a child, and I promise that I'll always help him reach his full potential." Author's notes. So what do you think for the start of the story? I know that the Moonlight Knight was Mamoru in the anime, but that was anime only and that outfit is so much cooler than the tux and those are the only two male hero fighting uniforms shown in the series besides Prince Endymion. Question just out of curiosity, do you guys want me to pair Naruto up with a Sailor Scout, brought to Konoha by A's yet undetermined method, a Naruto girl, and keep them two within like 3 or 4 years of Naruto's age, Setsuna Mayu exempted, a harem of Naruto girls, a harem of Sailor Scouts, or a mixed harem? Note the harem will, if I go that route, have a max of 4 girls. Feedback is appreciated and will help me make my decision. I retain the ultimate say on Naruto's love life for this story. Please note that any votes for Tsunade or Chibi Yusa will be ignored. Naruto roof hopped as fast as he possibly could towards the Ninja Academy hoping that he wouldn't arrive late for the exams. Still, he had to admit that if he was late he would at least have a good excuse. That would be if, as he realized, he could tell it to Ruka. However, Luna had taught Naruto not to break his word once he gave it and Naruto especially didn't want to break his word to Luna. Luckily for Naruto, he managed to make excellent time and got into the classroom before Iruka. So, even though Naruto was technically late, Naruto didn't get in trouble for being late. Naruto managed to contain his excitement as he listened to what Iruka was saying. Now then, class, today is the day you have all been waiting for. Today you will be able to show that you have what it takes to become full-fledged ninja of Konoha. At this, almost the entire class broke out in cheers before Iruka quieted them down. He then handed them a paper test and told them to start. Once he collected the completed tests, Iruka then said to the class, after pulling out a clipboard, "Now I want you all to form a line and we'll head down to the gym. Once we get there, you will all be tested on your throwing accuracy, your taijutsu, and your stealth capabilities." It took a few minutes and the use of Iruka's infamous, at least among students, big head jutsu, to get the rambunctious 13-year-olds to form the line that Iruka wanted. Once he had corralled the Cat's Air graduate hopefuls, Iruka led them down to the gym where Mizuki was waiting for them. Once their throwing accuracy test, in which Naruto scored above average, was done, the students were told to sit on a bench. The students had been sitting for a few minutes while Mizuki and Iruka talked to each other before Mizuki walked up and said, "Okay then, class, I'm sure you all want to know why you're sitting here. Well then, we've decided that, in order to test your taijutsu skills, we're going to have each of you fight a one-on-one match with your fellow students. Please note that you will not be allowed to use nin or genjutsu in the match, and you are also not allowed to use weapons of any kind. Now don't worry if you lose, this is just for us to see how good your pure taijutsu is, and while taijutsu is important to a ninja, it is not the only skill a ninja needs to succeed." Since only one match was being held at a time, the students not currently fighting were just shooting the breeze with their friends. Naruto was sitting with his legs in a lotus meditating position with his hands crossed over his chest deep in thought. However much Naruto wanted to think about what he had found out about his life, his musings were quickly interrupted by Kiba, who yelled at Naruto saying, "Hey Moonfish, what happened this morning? Did your funny feline excuse for an ant have trouble with a hairball or something?" Not wanting Kiba to get the last laugh or insult Luna, Naruto fired back, "What would you know, dog breath? After all, your owner Akamaru knows that you're too stupid to understand the spoken language." Kiba's mouth was wide open in shock as his and Naruto's classmates started laughing at him. Turning to see Naruto smiling at him with laughter in his eyes, Kiba shook his head and thought to himself, "That's a point to you, my friend." Although Kiba and Naruto seemed to fight like cats and dogs, the two were reasonably good friends. Suddenly Naruto and Kiba heard Mizuki call out, "Will Naruto Tuskino and Kiba Inuzuka please come up for their fight?" At this, the two friends got up and smiled at each other as they approached the ring. Once the two of them had reached their ends of the ring, turned to face each other, each confident of their victory over their friend. Mizuki just looked at the two and said, "You both know the rule for this match, begin." The two boys shot at each other and began to ferociously attack each other. Both the Inuzuka and the newer Tuskino family styles were animalistic in their attacks. It seemed to the onlookers that Naruto and Kiba were trying to claw each other's throats out. However, Kiba spent most of his taijutsu practice time at home and in class working with Akamaru. This fact meant that Naruto, who was faster and more unpredictable, was able to exploit several holes in Kiba's defense that would normally be protected by Akamaru. Finally, Naruto ended the fight by exploiting one of the holes in Kiba's defense. Naruto delivered a powerful kick to the other boy's ribs with one foot and another kick to Kiba's head. Naruto then back-flipped off of Kiba, who was falling to the floor unconscious, to land on the ground hunched over on his back legs like a cat. A couple of the students who had been watching the fight clapped and Iruka smiled, saying, "Very good, Naruto. Now can you bring Kiba over here so that I can wake him up? After all, do you want to have a rematch after class with an angry Kiba and Akamaru because you caused them to miss the rest of the test? Now do you?" When Naruto heard this, he just grumbled a bit and dragged Kiba over to the sidelines. Naruto was starting to look around where he was for something to wake Kiba up when a hand went in front of his face. In the hand was a small container of smelling salts. Looking down the arm attached to the hand, Naruto saw that it was Ino who had gotten the salt for him. With a quick, "Thank you," Naruto grabbed the container from Ino and promptly used it to get Kiba up. Ino and Naruto then helped the still wobbly Kiba get over to the bench. Ino then had to leave for her match against one of the other girls in class. Kiba then, while only paying half attention to the fight going on, turned to face Naruto and said, "Good fight there, Naruto." Kiba then smiled and said, but you do realize, Moonfish, that if I was allowed to have Akamaru with me in the fight, we would have cleaned your clock. Naruto playfully shook his head and said, I must have hit you harder than I realized. Dog breath, you're suffering from delusions brought on by head trauma. The two rivals and best buds stopped their good-natured teasing to see Ino knock out her opponent. The two boys knew that Ino would win, as her opponent was one of, besides Sakura Hirano, Sasuke's biggest fangirls. Although it annoyed the two boys that Ino, who was kind of their friend, was an Uchiha fangirls, they knew that at least Ino didn't let her crush distract her too much from her training, which was more than most girls could say. After the last two students had their match, everyone headed outside to where some genin, in the most desired D-ranked mission available that day, had set up a very complex obstacle course. Iruka walked in front of the class and then said in his stern teaching voice, "All right, class. As you can see, behind me is a large obstacle course. Inside of this course are numerous non-lethal traps and noise makers. You must go through the obstacle course to the other end where there is a scroll inside a blood seal with your name on it placed by me. After you've retrieved the scroll, you are to make your way back through the course to here where you will give me the scroll. Now then, before I start calling out names, there are a few things that you should know about this course. You will be graded on how fast you complete this course and how silently you complete it. All along the course are various things set up that, if disturbed, will cause a bell to be rung. Also, if you activate a trap and are caught by it, you will automatically fail this part of the test." Iruka then let that information sink into his students' brains, then he started calling people to run the course. The first few people he had called up were abysmal failures, getting caught by the first of 30 non-lethal traps. The next person managed to get through the course, but rang the bell a few times and took a good while to complete. Most of the class either completely failed the course, rang the bell a lot of times, or rang the bell a few times and took a very long time to complete the course. However, Naruto just had to be difficult and disrupt the set pattern by finishing the course in the fastest time without ringing the bell once. A few of Sasuke's fangirls were baffled that Naruto was able to complete the course so well compared to Sasuke, who was only average in the course. Finally, the students were herded into the classroom where they waited to be called for their final test. After a few minutes, Naruto's name was called and the smiling blonde boy was led by Iruka to a separate room for his testing. Iruka closed the door and with a smile on his face said to Naruto, "Okay Naruto, I want you to use the substitution jutsu, the hedge jutsu, to become the Hokage, and create at least 2 clones." Naruto was confident about the substitution and the hedge jutsu, but he was nervous about the clones. Even with his hours of training for years, he still was pathetic with the clone jutsu. Still, he was so close to becoming a ninja, so Naruto left it up to chance and tried his best. His substitution jutsu was quite impressive as he switched with a potted plant on the other side of the room. Next, Naruto hedged into the Hokage and was given a simple nod from Iruka showing that he had passed. Finally, Naruto performed the clone jutsu and closed his eyes. Naruto opened his eyes to see 2 clones around him. One could pass as him, if a person's eyesight was less than great. The other clone looked like a badly burnt large roast. Naruto cringed at the sight and turned to face Iruka and asked, "Do I become a ninja or not, Iruka?" Iruka scratched his head, thought about it for a moment, and then said, "While your clone technique is, to be blunt, the worst in the history of the Ninja Academy, your other skills are enough to make it up. Therefore it is my pleasure to declare you a new ninja of Konoha." Naruto practically jumped up and down when he heard the news that he had graduated. He watched as Iruka put his hand in the box containing the forehead protectors for the graduates and pull out a protector. Iruka then handed the forehead protector to Naruto, who eagerly put it on his forehead. Naruto then left the academy after hearing Iruka tell him when to show up for team placements. Upon arriving at his and Luna's home, Naruto found that Luna had left him a note on the table. Picking up the note, Naruto read, "Dear Naruto, sorry I'm not here to grade you when you get home from your genin exam. It doesn't matter to me whether you pass or not as long as you do your best at it. However, I do sincerely hope that you pass your exam, as I know how much you want to be a ninja. I've picked up some groceries that we were out of and put them away. I'm now heading over to visit the Hokage to talk about the you-know-what. However, you know how busy the Hokage can be, so it might take a while to talk with him. Hopefully I won't leave you here alone for too long and I won't be mistaken for that hell beast Tora again. Love, Auntie Luna." Naruto smiled after he read the note and placed it back on the table. It still amazed him that people could mistake his Aunt Luna for the most feared nightmare of all D-ranked missions. The last moron who had made that mistake was still walking funny from Aunt Luna's 1,000 years of pawn technique, which involved shoving the poor victim's own arm up their own butt. Not even Sarutobi had been able to figure out she did that on one of his own ninja, and in cat form no less. Naruto then sat at the dinner table trying to decide what he should do while he waited for Luna to return to the house. Suddenly a thought came to Naruto's mind that he said out loud, "Hey, Luna doesn't want me to reveal my royal powers to anyone until she can talk to me. However, she never said anything against me practicing my powers as long as I don't get caught." At this, Naruto rubbed his hands together like the archetypical troublemaker before he ran out the door to go to one of his favorite training fields. Naruto ran for a few minutes until he reached a meadow that was far away from any home or training ground in Konoha. Once there and Naruto made sure that no one was around, Naruto grinned and shouted out, "Moon Crystal Armor, energize." Naruto felt the now familiar power of his senshi form flow into himself, leaving him stronger than any two average jonins. Naruto then said to himself after he saw that he was in the same exact outfit as last time, "You know, if I'm not supposed to reveal that this is me, how on earth can I use this form to fight other ninjas?" At that thought, Naruto crossed his arms across his chest and thought for a few minutes. Then he snapped his fingers when the answer came to him. "I know. I can go by an alias. Now what's a good name for this form? Mighty Moon. No, that name's horrible. Should I go as Serenity Soldier? No. That just isn't right for me." Naruto thought long and hard about his options for a few minutes before he said, "I know. I'll go by the name Moonlight Knight. It fits as it connects me to the moon, which is where I get my extra power, and it shows my royal heritage with the noble title." The newly named Moonlight Knight then thought about the next issue he should solve. One thing that he hadn't gotten to test with his senshi form, which was one of many things, was if he could use his ninja skills in the senshi form. To start this off, Naruto performed a simple substitution jutsu. After running though his, admittedly small, collection of jutsu, Naruto found that he couldn't use his head jutsu and that the clone jutsu just as bad as his untransformed state. Naruto spent a few hours going over his skills and getting used to his senses and reflex while in senshi form. He was about to go home when his enhanced ears heard the sound of maniacal laughter. Naruto, while still in his senshi form, quietly approached the source of the laughter to see Mizuki running with a large scroll on his back and a sadistic grin on his face. Naruto thought about what to do when he heard Mizuki say something that made up Naruto's mind. "Once I deliver this to Lord Orochimaru, I'll become even more powerful than that old fool of a Hokage." Naruto recognized that name from his history class and knew that, whatever it was that Mizuki had on his back, could not reach the most vile and infamous traitor that Konoha had ever produced. From his position on a large tree branch above Mizuki, Naruto pulled out 3 shuriken and let them fly at a ferocious speed. Mizuki barely sensed the shuriken in time to avoid a fatal encounter involving them in the back of his head. However, while Mizuki did avoid death, he lost several locks of hair and had his right ear cut. "Aahhhhgg. Mizuki cried out, reflexively protecting his bleeding ear with his right hand. Enraged and with a touch of madness in his eyes, Mizuki yelled out into the night, "Who's the bastard who did this? Whoever did this should reveal themselves to me right now, and I might just grant them a quick death." At this, Naruto smirked and said, thus drawing attention to his location on the branch, "I did that, you traitor." Mizuki looked on at Naruto standing there with on hand on the trunk of the tree and the full moon glowing behind him and yelled out, "I just want to know, before I kill you, just who the devil are you?" Although a little nervous due to the fact that he had never been in a death match before, Naruto confidently answered back, "I'm the Moonlight Knight. Just so that you know, I shall be the last person you meet before you met the devil in hell." With the pleasantries dispensed with, Mizuki started off their fight to the death. He pulled out a huge windmill shuriken from a small seal on his wrist and sent it flying at Naruto. Naruto waited calmly for the shuriken to come to him as he planned out his next few moves, eternally grateful now that Luna had made him play those strategy war games. Just as Mizuki was about to smirk at the thought that his oversized shuriken would hit Naruto, Naruto quickly drew his sword and quickly sliced the shuriken in half. While Mizuki was shocked at the sight, Naruto just smirked and yelled out, "Not good enough, now why don't you try my attack, Serenity Slash?" With that, Naruto performed a quick horizontal slash and a wave of silver energy went flying in the shape of a crescent moon towards Mizuki at extreme speeds. Mizuki instinctively knew that the Serenity Slash, if it hit him, would kill him, no ifs, ands, or buts. The traitor leaned back and rolled quickly to the left. Mizuki was rolling away so fast that he lost track of where he was in the forest and hit himself against a tree. While the tree didn't do any lasting damage, it did stun Mizuki. This stunning, along with the shock at seeing the Serenity slash dig into the ground about a foot before exploding, leaving a 2-foot wide and several feet long crater in the ground, gave Naruto the time he needed to get down from the tree and stab Mizuki's heart. The last thing Mizuki saw before his eyes closed forever was Naruto transforming back into his regular form. Once he dropped out of his senshi form, Naruto came out of his adrenaline rush and fell down on the ground in shock at what he had done. Naruto, while trained to be a ninja and had known that this would eventually happen, was still a young teenage boy who had just taken his first human life. Naruto raised his hands and looked slowly between them and Mizuki's still warm body and back again for a few minutes. He then leaned over and heaved up the snack that he had before training. Naruto, after he was done emptying his stomach, smacked his face and shakily said, "Get a gripe, Naruto. You knew that this was eventually going to happen when you signed up to be a ninja. You've stopped a traitor from giving something that is of obvious importance to one of the greatest criminals out there. What was it that the old man told you about this situation?" He said, "One can't restore or return what was lost, only continue on and never forget about it, never forgive themselves should they forget the pain." Naruto approached Mizuki's corpse and turned his gaze to the scroll on Mizuki's back. Speaking to himself again in a very tired voice, "Come on Naruto, you just have to return this scroll to Hokage and then put this behind you." Naruto took the scroll from Mizuki's back and started walking off towards the Hokage tower. He was about to leave the area when he shook his head and returned to Mizuki's body. Traitor or not, Naruto knew that he just couldn't leave the body there in the field exposed. With a great deal of effort, Naruto picked up the body and carried it bridal style back to the village. It was 10 minutes after Naruto started walking towards the tower that he ran into Iruka and Anko, who had teamed up with Iruka to find Mizuki and the scroll. The Chunin and Jonin took one look at the blank look on Naruto's face, the scroll on his back, Mizuki's body, and figured out that Naruto had stopped Mizuki. Iruka promptly sealed the body of his deceased, now ex-friend and then led Naruto straight to the Hokage. In the Hokage's office when Iruka and Naruto arrived were a very worried Sarutobi and Luna. Both of them quickly grew sadder and more worried when Naruto told them that he had killed Mizuki after he heard him talking about giving the scroll that was on Mizuki's back to Orochimaru. Sarutobi, sensing that Naruto was leaving something out of his report, dismissed Iruka after telling the worried Chunin that the team lists would be on the Chunin's desk at the end of the week. Once Iruka had closed the door, Sarutobi turned to Naruto and said in his worried grandfather voice, "Now then Naruto. What was it that you were leaving out of your report?" At this Naruto's surprise showed for a moment before he realized that the Hokage had been around and had been a ninja since, according to Luna, before his father had been born. Naruto then said, "Everything is as I reported it. However, I was training in my senshi form at the time Mizuki encountered me and it was with the sword I have in senshi form that I slew Mizuki." Sarutobi figured how hard it must be for Naruto to use something he had been so excited about earlier today to take another person's life. The kind old ninja then got out of his chair and gave Naruto a comforting hug. Softly the old Hokage whispered in Naruto's ear, "I know this is difficult for you Naruto. Just remember this, you have been given great power and with great power comes great responsibility. Tonight you wisely used the power that you have to protect this village from a very dangerous enemy. That scroll you recovered contains the most powerful jutsu known in this village, and you prevented it from going to a man who would use it to kill the people of this village." Sarutobi ended the hug and sat back down in his chair. This allowed Luna, who had now transformed into her human form, to walk up to Naruto and give him a hug. She also had some words of comfort to say to her charge. "Naruto, I want to tell you something about your mother. When she first received the ability to access her powers, your mother was quite scared by it. I can't tell you how many nights she would cry herself to sleep because she didn't want the power she was burdened with. But your mother was able to find the courage and strength within herself to accept her burden and use it to protect others. I'll tell you something Naruto, I see that same courage and strength that I saw within your mother within you as well. And just like your mother, you have your friends who will help you through this and all other challenges." Naruto now had a smile on his face. He was still upset and in pain due to what had happened with Mizuki, but he no longer was tormented by it. Knowing that he had Aunt Luna, old man Sarutobi, Iruka, and even Kiba and Ino, backing him up had returned Naruto's spirits to him. Remembering the scroll on his back, Naruto swung it around and into his hands before he handed it over to Sarutobi. Sarutobi gladly accepted the scroll from Naruto before putting it by his desk. Lighting up his pipe, Sarutobi let out a puff of smoke before he started talking. Naruto, in all of the commotion today, we've never gotten to explain to you the full situation with the Kyuubi. You see, Naruto, when the Kyuubi attacked Konoha, it was like a force of nature. None of our jutsus slowed the beast down or even scratched it. Even at his strongest, the Yondaime Hokage could only hope to seal the foul demon. To this day, I am convinced that only one person in history who could have hoped to have truly slain that beast once and for all on that day. That person was your mother, Usagi Tuskino Namikaze. However, about a month before you were born, your mother was attacked and badly wounded by Rouge ninjas from Iowa. Both you and your mother lived through the attack, as your standing here shows, but your mother was badly wounded. At the time the Kyuubi attacked Konoha, your mother had been confined to her hospital bed due to a horrible infection that had set in, as well as the lingering effects of poison from the attacker's weapons. Your mother had somehow established an empathic connection with almost all the ninjas of Konoha. The mental shock of all of their death by the Kyuubi, plus her injuries, prevented her from living more than a few minutes after your birth. Left with no other hope, your father Minato Namikaze took you and used the dead demon-consuming seal to lock the Kyuubi forever within you at the price of his soul. Yes, Naruto, your father Minato Namikaze was the Yondaime Hokage. I had your last name changed to your mother's maiden name to help protect you from your father's enemies. I can understand if you want to take the Namikaze name again, but please don't do so until you are at least a Chunin, so that I can rest easier knowing that you can protect yourself from your father's enemies. Naruto closed his eyes for a few minutes to fully digest what Sarutobi had told him. He had for a while suspected that he had some sort of blood connection to the Yondaime due to how much they looked alike and how little information about the Yondaime's family was available. However, he had figured that their relationship was something like the Yondaime being an uncle or cousin to him, not that the Yondaime was his father. While other boys might have been angry at the Yondaime if they were in his position due to what his old man had done to him, Naruto wasn't angry at all. It was the only way to protect the village, and he would have never respected his father if his father had chosen someone else instead of him to bear the burden of the Kyuubi. Besides, the Kyuubi was dead thanks to the power of his mother that flowed through his veins. Opening his eyes, Naruto looked directly into Sarutobi's eyes and said, I understand why my father did what he did. I would have cursed him if he had dared to choose someone besides his own flesh and blood to have to bear the burden. Don't you worry about me going by my father's clan name anymore, Sarutobi. I belong to the Tuskino clan, and it is the Tuskino clan, not the Namikaze clan, that I plan to make into the greatest ninja clan. I would greatly appreciate it if you would transfer any and all holdings my parents left me in the Namikaze name over to the Tuskino family. I may respect and admire my parents, but I will not rest on what they have done, and I will not have people respect me just for what they did. With said, Naruto bowed his head in farewell before leaving to go home. About 3 minutes after Naruto left to go home, Luna left to join her nephew with a scroll in her mouth. The scroll contained a few techniques that Sarutobi had written down and had asked Luna to give to Naruto. On the way out the door of the tower, Luna passed by a Jonin who waved at her. Luna recognized the Jonin as one of the ninjas that Usagi had been very good friends with. If Luna could read the Jonin's mind, then she would know that the Jonin was determined to get Naruto as part of their genin team and would accept no other answer but yes. In the classroom about 2 weeks later, all of the new genin were assembled and waiting for Iruka to come in and tell them which teams they were going into. Naruto was thinking back to the 4 jutsus on that scroll that Sarutobi had given to Luna. On the scroll was Earth Release, Inner Head Decapitation Jutsu, Shadow Clone Jutsu, which was a clone technique that he could actually do, Great Clone Explosion Jutsu, and Shadow Clone Kunai Jutsu. Currently Naruto was only able to perform the first 2 techniques on the scroll, but he was happy with his progress. Naruto was so into his thoughts that he missed Iruka coming into the room and Iruka's speech. When Naruto stopped musing on the jutsus that Sarutobi had given him, Iruka was partway through the list of teams. Now then, Team 7, we have Sasuke Uchiha, Sakura Haruno and Shino Aburame. Your sensei will be Kakashi Hatake. Team 8 is Hinata Hyuga, Shoji Akamichi and Shikamaru Nara. Your sensei will be Asuma Sarutobi. And finally, for Team 10 we have Naruto Tuskino, Ino Yamanaka, and Kiba Inazuka. Team 10's Jonin sensei will be Anko Mitarashi. Was a place that was both within and without of normal space-time. Off to the side of the royal palace of Pluto was a little building shaped like the Oracle of Rome. Within this inconspicuous building was the door to the cavern that held the time gates. Within that cavern stood a single figure in front of the time gates. That figure was Setsuna Mayo, the senshi of Pluto and princess of the same world. For the past month Setsuna had been frantically standing in front of the time gates, using every trick in her knowledge to manipulate the time gates to search for her missing princess. Usagi and Luna's bodies had never been found after the explosion of Pharaoh 90. This, plus the fact that Setsuna could still feel her connection of servitude to the royal moon family, told Setsuna that Usagi must still be alive. Setsuna had searched the time stream as far back as the pre-Cambrian period and as far forward as the Imperium of Man in the 40th millennium. But, for all of her searching, Setsuna had found no trace of the missing moon princess. This depressing fact had Setsuna to believe that Usagi must have been thrown out of the time stream altogether and ended up in a different dimension. This thought saddened Setsuna greatly. She had no experience with searching through alternate dimensions, and the books in her library only talked about how to travel to a known point in another dimension. However, even though it looked hopeless to Setsuna, she was determined to succeed. The scouts had been forced to tell the Tuskinos about the fact that Usagi was Sailor Moon and why Usagi was missing. The pained look on her princess's parents' faces when Setsuna had to tell them that she didn't know when their daughter would be back home always haunted her mind. Setsuna would have sold her soul to Pharaoh 90 if she could give the Tuskino family their daughter back. Suddenly Setsuna felt the time gates sense a burst of Lunarian royal power. However, the burst was too short for Setsuna to find more than the hyperdimensional area code that the burst came from. Even so, this burst made Setsuna's heart fill with joy. She was closer than ever to finding where Usagi was. She would locate the particular dimension soon enough. Naruto verse. Naruto, Ino, and Kiba did not have to wait long to meet their new Jonin instructor. As soon as Iruka had announced Anko's name, Anko walked through the classroom door in her trademark jacket and fishnet outfit, sporting her grin that made most Chunin want to run away. Anko pulled out a stick of dango and ate it in front of the class, looking like she didn't have a care in the world. One of the more pathetic of the new Genins started laughing at Anko and her outfit. However, any humorous mood was quickly killed as Anko took the now bare dango stick and lazily flicked it at the fool. That particular Genin found the stick embedded in his seat on a few millimeters from something he really didn't want to lose. Anko just smirked and yelled out, "All right, Team 10. Gear up and met me on the roof in 5 minutes or I'll feed you to my favorite pet snake." Anko then body flickered away, leaving her new victims, air students, to rush out the door. Iruka just sweet dropped as he saw the look of panic on the faces of the two troublemakers and their friend. Turning to face the rest of his class, Iruka looked to see the whole class suddenly very nervous at the thought of their own teachers. Anko Mitarashi was casually leaning against the side of a shed that was on the roof and thought about the past as she waited for her students to appear. Usagi was the only person who not only trusted her after Orochimaru deserted, but Usagi had seen past her mask and seen the pain that Anko was in. Usagi had always been there for her, and Anko would slit her own throat if she couldn't help Usagi's only son become the best that he could be. She dropped out of her musings as she watched her 3 new students rush onto the roof. Anko motioned with a tilt of her head for her 3 Genins to sit down in front of her. Seeing her students sitting down, Anko said, "All right, maggots. We're going to be working with each other until either you guys get promoted or you act stupid and get yourselves killed. I want to know what you like, what you dislike, what your hobbies are, and what your dream is." Ino Yamanaka at this point raised her hand as if to ask a question. Anko rolled her head and eyes before saying, "If you want to know something, just ask." Ino looked sheepish for a moment before she said, Anko-sensei. Could you answer the questions first? We know a little bit about each other, but we know nothing about you except for your name." Anko smirked and said after getting straight into Ino's face and giving Ino her patented creepy smile, "So the gossip girl want to know about little old me eh?" Anko then went back to leaning against the shed and said, "Very well then, gossip girl. I like dango and seeing my enemy's blood spilled. I hate weak female ninjas who only chase after boys. My hobbies, well, I like spending time in the forest of death. As for my dreams, well, I want to bring that bastard Orochimaru to justice." Anko, with yet another dango stick in her hand, pointed to Ino and said, "All right, gossip girl, spill your guts or I'll do it for you." Ino gulped and then quickly said, "My name is Ino Yamanaka. I like my friends, flowers, and Sasuke. I dislike Forehead Girl and most of the other girls in our class." My hobbies are working in my family's flower shop and reading psychology books. My dream is to become a respectable ninja and get a strong husband. It was implied by Ino's voice and posture that she hoped her strong husband would be Sasuke Uchiha. Anko the grunted and said, "Okay dog boy, you know the drill." At this Kiba growled because of the insult before he started speaking. My name is Kiba Inuzuka. I like my partner Akamaru and playing jokes. I dislike Sasuke Uchiha and people who make fun of others. My hobbies are pulling off a good prank and training with Akamaru. I have a dream of becoming a good leader for my clan. Naruto decided to beat Anko to the punch and said, "My name's Naruto Tuskino. I like my Aunt Luna and a few other people around the village. I hate people who don't look at a situation from all angles, and I absolutely despise people who expect to have things handed to them on a platter because of who their parents were. My hobbies are training and playing strategy games. My dream is to have a family and establish the Tuskino clan as the most premier ninja clan on the continent." Inside her mind, Anko went over what her students had told her with what she knew from her files on them. Boy, is this a very interesting team I've been given. That Yamanaka girl is a fangirl, no doubt about it. Luckily for me, it seems that her crush is not the alpha and omega of her existence like some of the worst cases, and I can probably shape her up into a decent genjutsu mistress. The Inuzuka, he's a bit of a toughie to place. Best bet is to teach him some more stealth techniques and help him with a few non-clan jutsus to mix up his abilities a bit. Naruto, he just as determined as I thought he would be and could very well succeed at his dream. With the list of jutsus that the Hokage gave the boy and his awakened bloodline, I won't need to teach the boy any jutsus for a while. For him, I should just spar with him and teach him to work in a team better. Team 10 was nervously watching their new teacher as she stood there in thought. A slight shiver went down their spines as they saw Anko smirk and say, "All right maggots, it's time for me to give you your final test." At this, Ino blurted out, "What on earth do you mean by our final test?" Anko closed her eyes, smiled at her team, and said, "You honestly didn't think that passing the pathetically easy test you were given automatically made you a ninja, did you? Each Jonin is expected to give their students one finale test before they accept the Genin team as their students. If the Genins fail the test, then the Genins are sent back to the academy." The three young teens turned to look at each other and figured that they wouldn't like where this was going. Anko's smile got even brighter as she said, "Your exam is going to be different and far more challenging than any other team's test. You are going to take these paint cans." At this point, Anko pulled out some full paint cans from behind her back, "and you three are going to each write your initials on all the faces of all 4 Hokages on the monument. After you do that, then all 4, and yes, I'm including the mutt, must then make it back to this rooftop before sundown. If even one of you is caught, you will all fail this test. Oh, and just so that you know, your initials have to be able to be seen from the village." With that said, Anko's body flickered away, leaving the paint cans with the shocked kids. Kiba smacked his hand against the ground and yelled out, "What is wrong with our sensei? How on earth does she honestly expect all of us to graffiti our names on all 4 of the Hokage's faces, especially graffiti them large enough to be seen by the village? We'll be caught by our fellow ninjas and sent back to the academy before we can start on the Nadame's face." Ino was just depressed and said in a defeated tone, "Not only that, but my parents will ground me for forever once we're caught. It won't matter if we're following our sensei's orders or not." Naruto listened to his comrades complain about the hopelessness of the task, before he finally had enough of their complaining and yell at them, "What is with you two and this attitude? We haven't even tried yet and you're all ready to go back to the academy." At this, Kiba turned his head and angrily answered Naruto, "Are you brain dead, moonfish? Do you really expect us go pull something like this off and actually get away with it?" Naruto smiled and said, "Don't worry dog breath, the task is actually easier than you believe." Turning to Ino, Naruto said, "Ino, can you cast a weak low-level field genjutsu?" Ino blinked her eyes before she answered Naruto, hoping that the unpredictable boy actually had a plan. "Yeah, I can cast a low-level field genjutsu. It would leave me almost completely drained, but I can do it." Naruto smiled as he was now sure that the half-baked plan he was cooking would actually work. He then motioned for Ino and Kiba to come closer to him and he pulled out a detailed map of Konoha. Naruto then began to confidently dictate his plan. "All right then. The objective before us, in this mission, is to graffiti the monument and not get caught. Although the situation looks hopeless, we have several advantages going into this situation. The biggest advantage we have is that we are aware of our opposition and they aren't aware of us. At this, Kiba and Ino blinked their eyes in unison before motioning for Naruto to continue. If you pay any real attention to the ninja on guard duty in the village, you will see that they switch patrols at 4 times during the day. These times being midnight, 6 a.m., noon, and 6 p.m. It's currently 3:30 p.m. That means that if we take out the guards now in a surprise attack, we would then have 2 hours and a half, till guard changes in which to work undisturbed. With Ino placing the weak genjutsu, we won't have trouble with people from the village as they won't think to check the monument for one. The plan was starting to make sense to Naruto comrades, but Kiba saw a serious problem with the plan. Moonfish, are you a complete idiot? Your whole plan revolves around us getting rid of the guards in a sneak attack. They outnumber us and are far more trained than us, we can't beat them without alerting security. Naruto now had a mischievous grin on his face as he said, remember that day Kiba 2 years ago when you were trying to do a dual hedge with Akamaru? Kiba started to shiver and Ino started to see red. They both remembered that day. Kiba had tried to hedge both himself and Akamaru at the same time, but he was new hedges and transformed himself and Akamaru into young girls. Kiba had never had such a ferocious beat down in his life. Kiba suddenly got where Naruto was going with this and said, no way in hell Naruto. I will not transform into a girl to distract the guards. Get Ino to do it Naruto. After all, that is what they spend most of the time teaching the girls. Akamaru jumped off of Kiba's head just before Ino slammed her first straight into the top of Kiba's head. Naruto just shook his head and said, Ino has to do the genjutsu because neither of us can. Also, of the two of us, you're the one who was bragging about how well you aced the hedge part of the test while I only scored above average. Kiba knew that Naruto had backed him into a corner and both of them knew it. Both he and Naruto had a considerable deal of pride, but they would also back up what they boasted about. However, this was bad for Kiba as Naruto had basically forced him to do the task or admit to not being as good as he claimed to be, and Kiba just couldn't have that happen. So, grudgingly Kiba agreed to be the one to knock out the guards. Seeing that his comrades would follow his plan, Naruto said, alright then. When Kiba knocks out the guards, I'll tie them up. Then we have Ino cast the genjutsu. Since she'll be drained form that and I'm the fastest runner, I will be carrying Ino on my back while we paint the monument. This way, if we get caught, Ino won't be left behind. Naruto stood up and looked firmly into Kiba and Ino's eyes, his strength of will shining so brightly that his friends felt their worries wash away from themselves. Naruto held his hand out in front of him and made a fist. Naruto then said, are you willing to risk it all with me? Are you ready to show our sensei and this village as a whole that you're ready to be a ninja, or are you going to let this opportunity pass you by? I know that we all have the power and skill needed to pull this off. We have been given all that we need to do this and any other task that we may be given. Will you join me in proving this, or will you let your self-doubt prevent you from reaching our goal? Both Ino and Kiba were heavily moved by Naruto's little speech. Ino was starting to see Naruto in a different light, instead of just one of the average Joes of the class like she had before. Kiba wondered where Naruto kept this side of himself that seemed to inspire everyone so. Kiba got up off his butt and said gruffly with his hands in his coat, what the hell? I'm in on this crazy plan of yours. Besides, after all of my bragging at home, my sister would have permanent teasing material if I fail this test. Ino shook her head and said, there's no way I'm going to let Forehead Girl become a ninja simply because I was given a harder test than her. Naruto looked at both of his friends turned teammates. He had honestly been nervous at even suggesting such a plan, but then he remembered a quote attributed to Father Minato, there are no weak soldiers under a valiant commander. While he didn't consider himself to be a valiant commander, Naruto hoped that the principle behind the saying would hold true. Seeing that his friends believed that they could pull off his quickly thrown together plan gave Naruto hope that they could pull it off. Not showing his doubt, Naruto raised his first in the and yelled, watch out world, cause Team 10 is on the move. Both Ino and Kiba joined in his shout before they all grabbed a paint can and took off towards the monument. In the shadows stood Anko, whose smile was threatening to burst into full-blown laughter. It was an open secret in the higher-up ranks that each Jonin would test their genin team on some concept that they held dear. Kakashi was famous for his emphasis on teamwork and so used the multi-purpose bell test. Her test was very different than the copycats, or even most other Jonins for that matter. Due to growing up during the last Shinobi War and having to deal with the betrayal of her teacher, Anko held determination and perseverance in high esteem. For her test, Anko had constructed a scenario that the genin would never expect. However, it was a scenario that would often come up in the life of a ninja. Anko had given her 3 would-be students a seemingly impossible task to perform and very little time in which to pull it off. Then she had just sat back and waited to see their reactions. Hiba's initial reaction had upset Anko, but Naruto had managed to pull the boy out of his defeatist mood. As Naruto laid out his plans, Anko couldn't help but be impressed with the little prince. Naruto had looked over her scenario like it was a board game and analyzed Team 10's opposition. At first she was going to just appear and explain the test to them and tell her team that they passed. However, as Naruto listed all of the variables and broke down the plan to his comrades, Anko decided to let them go for it. It would show that arrogant idiot of a council-appointed security chief how badly he had let things slip on internal village security. Anko looked up at the heavens and let out a sigh before she said, "My friends, you would be so proud of how your son has turned out. Usagi, he has your gentleness and compassion. Minato, he has your commanding will and your tactical mind. When you put those together in your son, you two gave birth to a person can lead armies into the depths of hell and his soldiers would gladly follow him." She let out a smirk and said, "He also has both of your stubborn streaks." Who else but Naruto would declare that he would make a small unknown clan into the most respected clan on the continent? Anko then body flickered away to get a good seat for the spectacle the 3 genin were planning. It was the talk of the town for days. Many of the people just could not believe that 3 genin would pull such a stunt, or even the fact that they pulled it off in the first place for that matter. Once it was circulated that the genin did it because it was a test by their sensei Anko Mitarashi, some people were calling for her to be demoted to genin at least. Luckily for Team 10, this was only being called for by a few councilmen who had lost major political capital in this debacle. After he had stopped rolling on the ground laughing his off, Sarutobi had launched a full investigation on the state of security within Konoha. Over several days the security investigation led to some facts that greatly startled Sarutobi to his core. Apparently, his old teammates, Danzo, and a few of the more radical councilmen were funneling resources away from several vital areas of Konoha's security. They were using the resources to build up support for what looked like a takeover of Konoha in order to make Konoha more like some of the more militant hidden villages. 2 of the major projects that the conspirators were running were Ne and Rei. Ne was originally a sub-organization within Anbu, but had been reorganized as their private army after he had disbanded the group 22 years ago. Rei was a project that enraged Sarutobi when he thought about what he read about it. Apparently, they were using Orochimaru's notes on human experimentation to create bloodlines and infuse them into ninja loyal to them. When Sarutobi looked over the photos of the poor souls who were suffering under Rei, he thanked Anko for letting Team 10 continue to perform the mission she had given them. If it wasn't for them vandalizing the monument, then this travesty would never have been brought to light. Still, it hurt Sarutobi's heart to find out what his friends had been planning to do. They had been his oldest friends and had been with him since he had become a ninja. It was with a heavy heart that Sarutobi sentenced them and the rest of their co-conspirators to death for treason against Konoha. Unfortunately, on the night before the execution was supposed to take place, the conspirators managed to pull off a successful jailbreak. Sarutobi had no idea of where the Fallen, as the public was calling the group, had fled to after their escape. But now that the scandal all was over and the old leader was feeling every day of his age, Sarutobi knew that he needed to do something to cheer himself up, but he didn't know where to look. He no longer had his old friends to fall back on, his wife was long dead, and his only 2 loyal students were miles away from the village. Sarutobi thought about heading home, but stopped himself. Asuma was currently in a very foul mood that he had ordered the execution of Asuma's godparents. Even though the 2 were traitors and Asuma knew that, it didn't change the fact that Sarutobi's teammates had been there more for Asuma when Asuma was growing up than he had been. Sarutobi didn't doubt for a second that Asuma was not just as appalled by their behavior as he was, but it was another widening of the divide between the father and son. When Sarutobi looked back on his past rationalizations of his absences, he couldn't help but weep at how flimsy his reasons seemed now in his old age. Sarutobi got up out of his seat and left the Hokage Tower. Slowly he walked through the streets of Konoha, the setting sun at his back creating a remarkable backdrop. With so few friends left alive, there was only one place that Sarutobi knew he could regain his spirit back. Soon enough Sarutobi reached the outskirts of Konoha and came upon the cottage where Naruto and Luna lived. Seeing that there was a light in the window, Sarutobi politely knocked at the door. The door quickly opened to reveal Luna in her rather attractive human form. Luna smiled at Sarutobi and said, "Hello Sarutobi. Naruto and I were just sitting down to dinner. You can join us if you want as we have plenty and you look famished." A small smile appeared on Sarutobi's face as he said, "A home-cooked dinner sounds wonderful right now." Once Sarutobi was inside of the modest home, he was almost immediately tackled into a hug by Naruto. Luna watched the two interact for a few minutes with a smile on her face. Over the years, Sarutobi had grown into a close friend of hers and Luna respected the old leader for all that he had given up in order to protect his village. But one of the things that she always loved to see was when Sarutobi and Naruto were alone and the two acted like they were just a grandfather and his grandson having a good time together. All the worry and pain that the two carried stoically all day just seemed to disappear. Dinner was a relatively quiet and planned affair. Although Luna could get acceptable deals from the merchants in town, she still had to really watch the budget and was thankful that Naruto had been given a license on his 10th birthday to be allowed to hunt in the forests outside the village. Currently they were having some rice and vegetables with bits of rabbit that Naruto had caught yesterday mixed in. Once everyone had finished eating dinner, the three of them sat around the table and enjoyed some small talk. Sarutobi was proud to find out that Naruto had learned the Shadow Clone Explosion Jutsu. However, Naruto was still upset that he wasn't good enough with the technique to use it in a spar or an actual battle. Sarutobi told Naruto that he was surprised that Naruto had become that skilled in the jutsus that he had given Naruto. Naruto had the decency to blush. Sarutobi was contemplating about leaving the happy little family alone for the rest of the night when Naruto pulled out his puppy eyes jutsu and roped Luna and Sarutobi into playing a strategy game. For the next 2 hours by the fire everyone sat around and played the game of Naruto's choice. Finally it was time for Naruto to go to bed. Naruto was initially hesitant to go to bed, but when Sarutobi mentioned that someone's team was looking at a C-ranked mission in the morning, Naruto rushed off to get some sleep. Once Naruto was upstairs Luna said, "How are you handling that situation Sarutobi?" Sarutobi just sighed and said, "I'm handling it one day at a time. Thank you for letting me join you two this evening. Spending time with Naruto always cheers me up." Luna had a faraway look in her eyes as she said, "Yes, Naruto does have that effect on people. His brain he got from his father, his heart he got from his mother." Sarutobi then nodded his head and then stroked his chin as he said, that he does, Luna." Sarutobi and Luna sat in silence for a minute before Sarutobi asked, "Luna, do you remember my question the other day? You never told me the answer." Luna twitted her paws nervously and said, "What you were asking about is highly unusual. While there may not have been any laws against it in the Silver Millennium, and it did happen at times in the history of the Japanese, it wasn't something that happened a lot." At this Sarutobi smirked and said, "But it did happen, didn't it Luna?" Her drooping head was all the proof that Sarutobi needed. Sarutobi then said, "Don't worry Luna, everything will be fine. Never forget that I have Naruto's best interests at heart. While my plan may be slightly offensive to you, you have to admit that it does help Naruto with no one getting hurt." Luna was forced to agree to Sarutobi's point in that regard, but she didn't have to like the plan to know it was a good one. Sarutobi then said goodbye to the Black Cat and left to go home. Team 10, which had picked up the nickname of Team Maelstrom, was standing in the Hokage's tower at the mission distribution office. Currently Iruka was giving out missions and smiled when he saw Naruto and his team approach. With a cheerful voice Iruka said, "Hey there Naruto, Ino, Kiba, here to pick up a new mission." The three genin in question just nodded their heads at their former teacher. Iruka pulled out a pile of missions and said, "Well let's see, we have walking the Inuzuka's dogs, there's some fences that need to be manned." At this point Naruto cut off Iruka and said in a collected, but annoyed tone, "Iruka we've done 16D ranked missions. We've earned the right for a C ranked mission. So would you please be so kind as to get out the C-ranked mission folder?" At this very moment Sarutobi walked through the door and said, "Very true Naruto, very true." Sarutobi turned to face Iruka and said, "Would you please get the C-ranked mission folder out for Team Maelstrom?" Iruka was no fool and knew that, although it was phrased like a question, the Hokage's question was an order. Iruka put the D-ranked mission file away and reached for the other mission file. Quickly scanning over the missions available that were listed, Iruka smiled and said, "All right guys, there's a merchant in Konoha that is traveling to a town on the eastern border of Fire Country who is looking for some ninja protection. He doesn't accept much more than a few bandits as he's only carrying furs, wood, and a few other odds and ends, but wants to protection to make sure that his goods arrive safely and on time. Do you accept the mission? Naruto looked at his two teammates to see what they had thought about the mission. Ever since their first mission that Anko had given them, Naruto had become the unofficial leader of the genin in Team 10. On seeing that Kiba and Ino wanted to take the mission, Naruto turned to Iruka and said, "On behalf of Team 10, I accept this mission." Iruka only sent a quick glance towards Anko, only to see her with a smirk on her face showing her approval, before he handed the mission scroll over to Naruto. Naruto opened the scroll and quickly scanned the full briefing of the mission. Turning to face his teammates, Naruto said in a voice that reminded Sarutobi of Naruto's father, "Ino, Kiba, this looks like a minimum of a 2-week mission. Go home and get your long-term mission packs, the ones that have the seal scrolls with most of your gear that we got a week ago. Go to your parents, tell them that you will be away on a mission for a while, and request at least one new technique scroll that you can practice the technique during the quiet parts of the mission. You will meet me in 2 hours at the main eastern gate of Konoha where I will be with our client." Naruto at this point gave his friends a smile before he turned around and walked out the door to take care of a few things he needed to do before the mission started. Ino and Kiba looked at each other for a second before they both nodded their heads at the same time and turned to leave. Iruka was staring at where the genin of Team 10 had been in shock before he turned to Anko and said, "What are you teaching those kids? They were acting like professional jonin." At this, Anko said, "They're very unique kids and actually I haven't had to teach them a whole lot. Mostly it's just been helping them see where their weaknesses are, and they just take care of the rest." Anko pulled out a dango stick and at one of the dango before continuing to talk. As for their command structure, well, that's something that developed naturally. Naruto seems to have I guess presence would describe it, about him that makes his want to listen to what he has to say. Combine this presence with the boy's very developed tactical mind and caring heart, and you have a leader that Ino and Kiba would gladly follow into hell. Sarutobi just nodded his head when he heard Anko describe it all to him. Minato had such a presence about him as well. It would make sense that Minato's son Naruto would have inherited that same presence as well. Also Usagi, may the gods rest her dear sweet soul, radiated a sense of respect and caring about her that seemed to have been inherited by Naruto as well. All in all, Naruto was shaping up to be what looked like a legendary figure. Sarutobi wouldn't be surprised if the boy had surpassed his father in greatness by Naruto's 18th birthday. When Team 10 met up at the specified gate of Konoha, they saw Naruto having a friendly chat with their client in front of an overloaded wagon. They learned that their client's name was Ryuga Yagnasaki. Ryuga was quite glad to meet with his guards and said, "Thank you for agreeing to accept my mission. I know that the kinds of goods I trade in don't fetch a large profit on the black market, but with the way some of the bandit groups are going lately, you never know." At this, Anko just smirked and said, "Don't worry about a thing. These kids can handle any bandits that might think you're a good target. If by some chance they can't handle the bandits, I'm here." Ryuga just smiled and said, "That's good to know. Now how about we get going? One of you can sit next to me on the wagon and another on the back of the wagon if they don't mind sitting on wood planks. I'll be going at a slow pace so as to not exhaust my oxen, so if what I know about you ninja is correct, the other two of you can walk next to the cart at a comfortable pace." With that said, Team 10 and their client left Konoha. What the hell is with these bandits? This the third raid against us since we left Konoha 4 days ago. Kiba yelled before he and Akamaru performed a fang over fang attack on a nameless masked bandit. Kiba was understandably annoyed because ever since they were a day out from Konoha, they had been attacked by bandits every day. Kiba was the first to admit that he liked a good brawl, but this was getting to be too much for him. Suddenly Kiba heard Naruto call from above him, "Kiba, 4 bandits approaching from 630, take care of them." Kiba didn't bother to grunt a response knowing that the one giving him the directions was only a shadow clone. Where Naruto had learned that trick, Kiba didn't know but was extremely grateful. Ever since that first attack, Naruto had at least one shadow clone sitting of the roof of the wagon at all times to act as a lookout. Now, the clone was firing off information to the rest of the team as Naruto and Anko were handling the main body of the bandit 100 feet away from the wagon. Ino, who was standing next to Ryuga at the driver's bench of the wagon, was busy deflecting various projectiles that were aimed at the scared merchant. Muttering to herself, Ino said, "What is with these bandits? We're only carrying deer furs, wood, and a few gardening supplies for crying out loud." Ino then called to the 3 Naruto clones that were protecting the oxen, "Hey. I need one of you guys to dispel yourself and tell Naruto that we need to capture one of these suckers alive. We need to know why we're being attacked like this. One of the Naruto clones nodded his head and promptly did as Ino had requested. Naruto, who was standing back to back with Anko, felt the clone's knowledge of Ino's request pop into his brain. Without turning to face Anko, Naruto called out, Ino wants us to capture one of the bandits alive in order for us to question the bandit on why we're being attacked. Anko shot back, sounds like that girl's got a good plan. It's getting boring just hacking these fools without knowing why they're going after us. With that, Anko and Naruto got to work making mincemeat of the bandits. 10 minutes later, Team 10 were standing around their single-bound captive, the first out of 200 bandits on this mission that they had left alive. Hyuga was currently setting up a small fire and was cooking dinner for him and his guards. The middle-aged man said that, although he knew that the interrogation would be needed, he just couldn't stomach to see it happen. Anko, not wanting her students to have to dirty their hands with interrogation just yet, was getting ready to find out the answers to her question. Anko woke up the bandit with a crack of a whip she always kept on hand, never knowing when she would want to use it next. The bandit looked up at the smirking Anko and started to quiver in fear. Using a tone that was guaranteed to scare the bandit even more, Anko, while grinning, said, "Okay, pond scum. Welcome to the School of Hard Knocks. The class is Remedial Pain 101 and I'll be your teacher for the day. Here's how the lesion will go. I'll be asking you some questions. If you don't answer correctly, you'll be given a penalty exam. Just so that you know, the first penalty exam will be to see how well you deal with losing your." At that last comment, Ino blushed and the boys of Team 10 crossed their legs in sympathy pain. One thing about Anko that they had learned early on was that Anko didn't know the meaning of the word restrain. Anko, however, was smirking. Her little threat towards a certain part of the bandit's anatomy had made the fool pay extra attention to her questions and would assure her that he answered all of their questions. Anko then decided to start off the integration questions. Alright then, why did you attack us? You bandits wouldn't normally go after a small convoy like us, especially considering the fact that it had an escort and was known to not have anything of great value. At this, the bandit swallowed a gulp and answered the grinning madwoman in front of him. I don't know the specifics of it all, but earlier today a man came into our camp and paid our boss to capture this convoy for him. This news got Anko's attention. Apparently there was someone targeting the convoy, but why? Anko's eyes narrowed as she almost hissed out with her voice laced in killing intent, "Describe the man who paid your leader. If you don't tell me everything about this man, I won't just stop with the first penalty exam." The poor bandit was reduced to a blubbering mass as he said, "I didn't get a good look at his face, but I know that he was bald. He was wearing a cloak that seemed to be a patchwork of browns and greens. He came in and left on this very large lizard that he made appear from nowhere." Team 10 watched as their sensei's eyes widened in shock and what looked like fear for a second before she cleaved the bandit's head off. Anko then turned to face her teammates and with urgency in her voice shouted out at them. "Don't just stand there. Search every nook and cranny of the wagon and report anything, and I mean anything, no matter how small or insignificant, that you don't recognize as being produced in Konoha. I've got to go talk to our client." Team 10 were confused at their sensei's actions but still obeyed. Opening up the wagon's canvas covering, Ino and Naruto walked inside while Kiba was checking around the outside of the wagon for any hidden compartments. A minute or so later, Ino called out, "Hey, I've found something that meets Anko's description." Ino reached into a side compartment of the wagon and pulled out a potted plant with strange patterns on its leaves. Ino carefully carried out the plant and headed over to Anko with Naruto and Kiba following her. Anko saw Ino approach and her eyes were fixated on the plant her student was carrying. Turning to face their client, Anko said in a voice that could freeze a person's blood, "Where did you get that plant?" Exclamation mark quote. At this, Hyuga, who was quite confused and nervous at seeing Anko like she was, said, "I was traveling through the land between the land of the waterfall and the land of rice when I spotted that plant growing. I'm an amateur botanist and was fascinated by the plant as I've never heard of a plant with leaves like it. I put it in that pot that your student found." At hearing this, Anko smacked her head and said, "Great, just great. That plant happens to be a Gakwaneth plant, which is of great significance to the Narn clan." At this, Ino blinked her eyes and said, "Ah, Anko, who are the Narn? I've never heard of that clan when my father was talking about the powerful clans of the various hidden villages. Why does the thought of them seem to have you so nervous?" Naruto and Kiba both nodded their heads, wanting to know who the Narn were and what was making their teacher so nervous as well. Anko motioned for her students to sit down and she began to lecture them. "Okay kids, listen up. Despite what most of the villagers talk about around you kids, there are powerful clans of ninja who aren't affiliated with any village. The Narn are one of these clans that aren't aligned to any ninja village. The Narn are a little different than most una-affiliated clans in that they've built, well, I guess you could call it a monastery for themselves in the area that our client here ventured through. That plant he took is sacred to the Narn clan. It is in fact so sacred to the Narn that for an outsider to take the plant without the approval of one of the Kari, which is what the Narn call their council of elders, is to be met with the death of the offender. At this everyone looked at Anko with worry in their eyes. Ryuga was shaking in fear as he said, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know that this would happen when I took that plant. It was just growing in the wild. I didn't know that something like this would happen. Ino was getting slightly scared at what Anko had told them and wanted to know something. Anko, is there any way we could just give back the Gakwaneth plant to whoever the Narn is that is attacking us? Anko shook her head and said, it's not that simple. You see, the Gakwaneth plant was taken and thus by the Narn beliefs it has been defiled. In order to get the Narn off our backs about the plant, one of us would have to fight and beat the pursuing Narn in fair one-on-one combat. If that person beat the Narn then, I don't know the exact circumstances behind it, the Narn would purify the plant, take it back with them, and declare that the victor would be an ally of the Narn clan. The problem is that we can only issue a challenge for combat once. If we violate the one-on-one combat or if our champion fails to win, then we forfeit our lives. If we were to resist this forfeiture, then the Narn would declare a blood feud on all of our blood relatives. To make matters worse, the Narn have a bloodline limit that makes them able to summon all reptile summons fully under their command with extremely little chakra needed. Even Manda, the snake boss summon, would be forced to obey a Narn who summoned him no matter how much he would hate it. Also, if someone else was to summon a reptile, the summon would be under the Narn's control and not the summoner. Naruto could see the problem with the Narn being after them. Anko was a great fighter, but almost all of her high-level attacks required the use of her snake summons. Against someone with the Narn's bloodline, Anko would be almost on the same level as Ino and Kiba. But what were they to do? This Narn would follow and continue to attack them until the Gakwaneth plant had been reclaimed, and the only way to do that was to beat them in combat. The only solution appeared in Naruto's mind. With firm eyes Naruto said, I'll be the one. I'm the only one who has a chance of beating this Narn in combat. At this Kiba and Ino looked at Naruto as if he was mad. Anko looked into Naruto's eyes and quickly figured out Naruto's train of thought. Cursing loudly Anko said, damn it kid, you just had to be right about that. As much as I hate it, Naruto fighting our attacker is the best chance of victory we have. While Ino and Kiba were looking on in confusion, no one noticed a small garden snake slither away from camp. Jakar Narn was sitting in his own camp with one of his snake summon spies came up to him and whispered in his ear. After the summon had dispelled itself, Jakar sat on a log deep in thought. So ninja guarding the criminal hadn't known about the man's sacrilege. Apparently the young blonde boy with whiskered checks was willing to fight him in order to save the defiler. Commendable bravery, but bravery wouldn't save this foolish youth from a Kari like himself. Still, there was something about the description of the boy that gnawed in the back of Jakar's mind. Jakar was, however, willing to give the foolish youth his request. Besides, using those bandits had been distasteful to a warrior like Jakar. Jakar then summoned one of the older of the snake boss's children and rode on its head towards the other camp. As Jakar approached the other camp he was pleased to see the boy who had talked about challenging him already facing him with determination burning in his eyes. At the very least, the boy was a warrior even if he was young. Jakar shouted out, I am Jakar Narn member of the Kari, who spoke of challenging me for the Gakwaneth plant. The blonde boy in front of him spoke out, my name is Naruto Tuskino and I issue the challenge. The name the boy had spoken shocked Jakar who muttered in his mind, Maelstrom of the Moon. But that is the name of the. Jakar stopped that line of thought. The boy in front of him couldn't have been the one, and now he would kill him for daring to bear that name. With fury in his voice Jakar shouted out, prepare to die. Jakar then rapidly performed a set of hand seals before shouting out, summon mimicry art, art of the frog oil fire. A large stream of oil came shooting out of Jakar's mouth, which Jakar promptly set on fire with some chakra from his thumb. Naruto dashed out of the way and retaliated with a shadow clone kunai jutsu. Jakar summoned a metal staff from a seal on his wrist guards and used the staff to deflect the kunai. Once the storm of kunai was over, Jakar looked from his perch on top of the snake to see that he was surrounded by a ring of Narutos. Jakar felt a smile cross his lips as he looked on the sight. This was going to be a great fight. Jakar then noticed all of the Naruto clones start rushing towards him and then whispered out in shock, "Don't tell me that he knows that attack." Jakar then jumped off of the summon in order to not be caught in the explosion created by all of the clones. Jakar landed on his knees, wiped away some blood from his lips. Turning to face Naruto, who was look at him with determination in his eyes, Jakar growled out, "Very good, brat. You're no ordinary boy, I grant you that. However, it's time that the kitty gloves come off." And with that, Jakar started to power up. Anko shouted out to Naruto, "Watch out, kid, he's putting out the power of a Sannin." Naruto had felt Jakar power up and didn't need Anko to tell him the obvious. This Jakar guy, even though he looked like a walking reptile man, was good. That last attack that Naruto had pulled off had used up about half of his remaining reserves that he had recovered since the bandits attacked. From how things looked, it was obvious that Jakar had the upper hand and both of them knew it. However, one common saying in the ninja world is, never expect things to be the way they look at first glance. Naruto smirked and shouted out, "You may think that you're winning lizard breath, but I haven't brought out the power of my bloodline limit." On the sidelines, Kiba and Ino looked at each other and Kiba asked, "Has Naruto's mind finally cracked?" Ino answered him in an unsure voice, "Who knows? I've never heard of the Tuskino family, so it's possible that Naruto does have a bloodline. But what kind of a bloodline is it that would allow Naruto to believe he could equal someone on Sannin level?" As if in answer to Ino's question, Naruto raised his fist into the air and shouted out, "Moon crystal armor, energize." Naruto was then covered in a pillar of white light. When the pillar of light receded, the Moonlight Knight was standing there with his arms folded across his chest and his cape billowing in the breeze. Naruto, or rather the Moonlight Knight, shouted out at Jakar, "Shall we now commence with round 2? Jakar just stood there looking at Naruto in shock. Anko heard the Narn warrior gasp out, "It can't be. Why did the auguries not mention that you had been born?" At this, Naruto got confused and annoyed. What was this reptile man spouting out about his birth being mentioned? Naruto got fed up with Jakar not attacking and cried out, "Hey reptile man. Are we going to get back to the fight or do you have a prior engagement?" Jakar was however lost in thought and inside of him a struggle raged. How dare he insult me so? Why weren't we told about his birth happening? Have we been compromised by the ancient enemy? How long has it been preparing that we didn't know about? This is far more important than the Gakwan Eth. Jakar closed his eyes as he reached a decision. Jakar then opened his eyes and called out to Naruto, "Consider the Gakwan Eth purified young storm. But beware, the tendrils of a great darkness are stretching out to consume the land. Grow strong, young storm, for you are the one that will be the light in the coming night of darkness." Jakar then body flickered away, leaving a confused Naruto behind. Naruto then turned around to look at his teammates to see if they understood what Jakar was talking about. It took only one glance at his teammates to see that they were as confused about the sudden turn of events as he was. Naruto and his teammates just stood there looking back and forth at each other for a few minutes. Suddenly Ino said, "Ah Naruto, why are you dressed like that?" Naruto looked at the determined gleam in Ino's eye and hoped that he would manage to retain some secrets from her when the night was over. Sailor verse. Setsuna Mayo was smirking and almost dancing for joy. That last burst of Lunarian royal energy had allowed her to pinpoint where the princess was at. Even though the energy was rapidly fading, Setsuna could now lock onto that dimension with just a thought. Not wanting to waste any time, Setsuna transported herself over to the Tuskino family household where all the scouts, the remaining Tuskino family, and Artemis had conveniently gathered together. Akuko Tuskino was currently sipping some tea, trying not to cry at the thought of her missing daughter. It had come as a shock to her and the rest of her family to learn that her sweet little Usagi had been fighting to protect the city from various monsters. Learning that her daughter was a reincarnated princess and that her closet friends had been her daughter's court was still a shock to the mild housewife. She could see that each and every one of her daughter's friends wanted to be the one missing instead of Usagi, and the thought that her daughter could develop such good friends made her smile. Akuko looked up to see a flash of light appear in the center of the family room and Sailor Pluto appearing out of the light. Setsuna was smiling and said in a pleasant tone, "I found where the princess is." At this, everyone who knew about Usagi and the real reason why she was missing came crawling out of the woodworks. After everyone was seated down, Setsuna said, "As you all know, during the death of Pharaoh 90, the princess was flung through a hole in space-time. I've just been able to detect bursts of royal Lunarian energy coming from a single point in one dimension. That means that we can go and bring the princess back home. Everyone let out a cheer of happiness at the news. Setsuna calmed them all down and said, however, there are a few bumps in the road to be taken care of before we can bring the princess back with us. I know the general area at that time, space location that the energy is coming from, but until we get to that dimension I can't pin it down to a location smaller than China. Also, the only way currently available to us to travel between dimensions will leave those who go to get the princess stranded there for at least a month while the method resets. To make it worse, I won't be able to tell the conditions of the world besides the fact that it's habitable until we make it to the other side. Ray then spoke up, so you're saying that whoever goes there will be going in blind and without any backup for at least a month? Setsuna just nodded her head and said, that's exactly what I'm saying. However, I do have a way for those who go to communicate with those who stay behind to protect Earth. I will be going as I am the only one who knows how to perform the transportation. Who will be going with me to find the princess?